My question, especially for the policymakers and the lawmakers and the leaders, the political leaders of the country, because they tend to go towards the prevention part of the work, which for people working in the field, they know it is quite difficult to impossible to do unless you put in really draconian laws. Why was it that your organization chose this clear bifurcation and went for mitigation? And how do you explain it to your lawmakers and the EU and people you work with?
Well, we went for this approach because we are an organization that's working on the basis of child rights. And the right to protection from harm is just as important as the right to the right kind of education, as the right to the freedom of speech, the right to a peaceful assembly, and I can just continue this list. And the problem is that the risk prevention approach very often has a major impact on other rights. I think that this was one of the first instances in policymaking that was heavily influenced by companies. It all started in the US. In the United States, the Convention on the Rights of the Child is not in power. So really, child rights are protected in a different way. The United States very early on adopted a piece of legislation called COPPA, which is a child protection legislation. And this is the reason why all the US-based companies that are offering services, from Facebook to Twitter to Google and a lot of others, have this threshold of the age of 13. And it's, I think, very unfortunate that the overwhelming majority of countries, including the European Union with their GDPR data protection regulation, just built on the basis of COPPA, and they don't consider children under 13 capable of making decisions for themselves. And also, for the overwhelming majority of policymakers, it's much easier to make decisions for you than believing in the major fact that parents are capable of raising their children. So our whole advocacy work that was trying to influence policy was based on the UNCRC with regards to child rights, but also with regards to parents' rights, because the UNCRC very clearly says that it is the right of the parent, also, well, whoever is in the role of parent, it can be a guardian, to make decisions on how they are raising their children. And the role of the government is a supportive role. They have to support the parents in ways the parents need it. Instead, governments have implemented a very paternalistic approach. It's easy to be afraid of new technology. It is easy to start regulating new technology more heavily, but it has to ease up after a certain point. And well, our starting point was that we had to promote the risk mitigation approach for the reasons I've said, that balance child rights. And you are asking us how we are succeeding with policymakers. I have to say that it's very difficult. In the EU, there are some organizations that are not independent, but they are heavily financed by the European Commission, and they very much support regulatory measures. But it is changing, as you can see, because this general comment number 25 is a huge success. We've been working for it for a very long time, but also we know that we have a lot of researchers on our side. We work very closely with researchers For example, Sonia Livingstone, who was one of the main authors of this general comment. But it is a very complex issue. What I always say is that, digital technology has been around for a quarter of a century. Of course, in different countries, it came earlier or later, but it's time to learn how to live with it. I don't know whether you know it or not, but when they first had cars, they were considered to be so dangerous that a boy had to run in front of the car with a flag showing that danger is coming. Of course, it meant that the cars couldn't drive properly because they had to drive slower or at the same pace as a child does. Currently, there are much faster cars in the street. Still, you are not locking your children in your house, but you rather introduce them how to cross the road safely. And this is the very same thing that we have to implement when we are thinking of digital technology. Digital technology is there to stay with us. So we have to teach our children how to go out and cross the street safely. And I think it's also very important that this also means that you have to start very early. I'm going to come back to this very simple example of crossing the road. If you teach your child who is 5 or 6, just the right age, to cross the street on his or her own, and you will teach him that you have to look right, then left, and right again, and then you can cross, then they will follow your advice. And by the time they become teenagers who are rebelling, it will not cross their mind to rebel by not looking. It will just become natural, like when you sneeze, you put your hand in front of your face, or you know how to use a spoon. If you first allow your children to cross the street on their own when they are teenagers, then they may rebel and they might be in much bigger danger. It's very much similar with the digitalization. If you allow your children to register on social media at a very young age, they will ask questions, and you can also tell them what to do and what not to do. If you only allow them at the age of 13, they probably will rebel your advice. And also, we know from research that until about age 11, 12, the biggest impact on learning is that of the parents. From then on, it's the peer group. So we have to introduce our children to digital media as much as possible before the peer group takes over. And this is how you can mitigate risks. If you let them do it by peer support, then your children will be at much higher risk.